Supersaw lover. Okay, so this mistake is usually going to be done by beginners who think every lead and every song they make needs to be a supersaw.
that buzzy, eat it up.
Now the fix for this one, of course, is going to be either one, stop using Nexus, two, find variations of the supersaw that will fit your track better. It's hard to explain how to avoid the cheese, but again, there's various different saws. There's different types of super saws. Stop picking that super saw that makes you sound cheesy. Okay, this is another mistake most producers are making, and I think everyone knows that we use too much reverb. I'm a reverb junkie myself. You have so much reverb that it sounds like you're in the Mariana Trench. The reason this mistake occurs is because a lot of the times we don't trust the idea. We're very insecure about our track sounding a bit empty. We will swamp our leads with reverb in order to compensate for that. Mucho reverb, amigo. Mucho reverb. Fuck. So how do we fix this? Well, this one's a very hard one to say because obviously there's various different genres and each genre has a theory on how much reverb it should have. One of the best tips I've ever seen by taking a course, I believe it was like Pro Mix Audio with Matthew Weiss. When you can barely hear the reverb, that's when it's right. And just pulled back a bit to where it sort of sits in the mix nicely. The reverb shouldn't be right in my face. Now, I understand there's exceptions to this, like certain genres, they want to throw that reverb in your face and drown you. But again, it's done in a more controlled way. For the majority of the music that you guys will be making, keep it simple. Keep it to a point where the reverb is not that obnoxious. And if it is, it has to be done because the song is asking for it, not because you feel like your mix sounds thin. The SYNTHS junkie. For this one, I'm looking mainly at the FL Studio guys, especially the guys that did FL Studio remix. They would literally layer like 10 instances of silent with the reverbs, the delays on, usually a bunch of vandalism, sound banks, in order to get something that sounded like this. The reason I consider this a mistake is because most of the time when my students would come in and they would be doing this, I would go into their presets, I would start listening to them, and I would start deleting a lot of lead. So this lead would be providing the highs. From there, I would also take away the reverb and delay. So we're adding this to the picture. So this one's adding, what it sounds like is a bunch of noise. So I would go into this preset. Again, we're going to get rid of the reverb. I don't really need the saw portion of this. I just need the noise. Sounds like this is providing width. So from there, we're going to mid-side EQ this guy. Do this. From here, you can start to process the lead, but compared to what we had before, obviously this lead is already having a lot more body, a lot more presence. Lead's brighter than the sun. This mistake will usually happen because a producer will try and get the lead to pop out of the mix in the most horrible way possible. With a high shelf like this, with a bell like this. And they'll Elon Musk it, and they'll go to the moon with this, to even Mars. Most producers need to do in a scenario where the leads are having difficulty popping out is to look at the other elements playing. The number one culprit of your lead not popping out is going to be the bass having too much high frequencies. So for example, we're going to go back to our big room. How do you expect your leads to pop out through that mess? So a lot of the times, if you want more presence in the leads, you have to sacrifice elsewhere. And a lot of the times that will be your bass. I can allow the highs to remain on the bass on the side signal, but not in the mid. So then you might try something like so. If then that doesn't work out, then you can try just doing it to the sides, for instance, like this. And then if that doesn't work, maybe you need to rethink the bass. Now, of course, if your leads are lacking a bit of brightness, then boost the highs. But if you're just trying to allow the leads to pop out of the mix, then you want to make sure to check other avenues over sidechaining your leads. Now, this one is one that I used to do a lot in the big room days. I would over sidechain them a lot of the times until fellow producers, Kevu, there was 2 of them back then, brought to light the idea of sidechain to me a little more clearer. Most people, when we used to sidechain back in the day, we would do something like this. Like, we got to make room for the kick. And myself, I would just do a sidechain like this on the leads. Okay. Now, the point of the sidechain is obviously most people will use it to remove the bass out of the way of the kick. So with the leads, you don't really have low end in them. So what's the point from there? What's the point of a lead to get sidechained? To allow the kick to punch through in the low end, to allow the click to punch through, right? So if we have a click like this, if that's the case, then you don't really need to sidechain your leads like this. You need to sidechain them like this. And then from there, you don't need to do this. All you really need is just a slight bit. All right, I'm gonna mix it with the click. Wrong sidechain on a lead will usually be that. Now, I know there's exceptions. Someone's gonna comment like, what if I want my lead to fucking pump, San? Fine, you could do it if the track asks for it. But for majority of tracks, the sidechain you guys sometimes do is so bad that you ask, like, I don't know when my leads sound weak. Maybe if you weren't chopping them in half, they would pop out of the mix more. Overwidening the leads. Now, this mistake, there's stages to it, because widening the leads, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's certain leads that, personally, I'm not a fan of getting widening, so this might be subjective, but I rarely see these kind of leads getting widened by top producers as well. Now, this mistake usually entails someone grabbing the Haas effect, like so. So now, the reason this doesn't sound too good is because, again, these leads, when they come out of the synth, first off, they're mono as hell because, again, we're using a retrig, we're not detuning. So widening these lead sounds, to me, inorganic, if that's a thing. But at the same time, it rarely works in the mixes that producers try to widen them for. However, if you wanted to use that on a lead like this, then sure, you want to widen everything, then go for it. Why? Well, the difference there is that we have a very lush, distorted sound versus a very monophonic driven sound. For example, if I put this sound mono, you can tell the sound does not belong down the center because it doesn't sound good. So we need the width. Only the last little subdivision of overwinding the leads is when people overwiden the leads with the effects. So usually this happens because you put the Haas at the end of the chain. So for example, if you have a reverb that covers the center and the sides, like this, and you put it, you can hear how now the reverb just sounds like on the sides, very unnatural sounding. Now, how do you widen the sound properly? Well, of course, if you're going to Haas effect the whole sound, make sure the Haas goes at the beginning. If you have a sound like this, if you want to make this lead wide, consider adding a layer that's wide. For example, here we can make this retrig off, have stereo, a bit of lush to it. Like so, and that sounds more organic than forcing this to be wide with the Haas, where it sounds like, you know, versus, again, adding that layer to give it that width. Other than that, guys, those are going to be some of the most common mistakes I've seen with my students and from people submitting their music to me on the feedback stream. Hopefully that's helpful. There's, of course, a lot more. So if you guys have any to add to the list, make sure to leave it down in the comments. I'd love to read. Other than that, if you want to support the channel, make sure to head over to evilsounds.com where you can find all of my sound design work. And if you want to check out my music, you can also find that on Spotify. With that being said, you guys take care and you guys have a great day.